and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Blanche of Castile. Blanca, Infanta of Castile, was born in 1188. Her father was the King of Castile, a kingdom that today makes up northwestern Spain. Her mother Eleanor was the daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Check out her episode for more about Blanche's grandmother. France and England had been fighting again, and England had won, so part of the peace treaty said that the King of England could choose the wife of the Prince of France, heir to the throne. The King of England was all, too long, didn't read, Mom, go do this for me. The king's mother was Matilda's grandmother, Eleanor of Aquitaine. She had originally picked Matilda's sister for this job, but upon arriving decided that 12-year-old Blanca would be more suited to it than her 13-year-old sister. Blanca was chosen to be the future Queen of France. Her sister did end up being the Queen Consort of Portugal. Their older sister was already the Queen Consort of Leon. Eleanor of Aquitaine was doing the Queen Victoria thing and attempting to turn her great-grandchildren into an empire. Their little sister became Queen Consort of Aragon, another neighboring kingdom. Between her sisters and herself, they were going to be the queen consorts of the entire north and west sides of the Iberian Peninsula and their northern neighbor of France. And her parents still had their heir and their spare at home in Castile. Fun fact-ish, Blanche's grandmother, Eleanor, had been the first wife of her betrothed grandfather, Louis the Younger. But that hadn't worked out. So 2 generations later, their grandchildren were giving it a shot. There have been 16 King Louis of France. They have had various nicknames, and it's been quite the trip. Louis the Pious, Louis the Stammerer, Louis the Third, Louis from overseas, Louis the Do-Nothing, Louis the Fat, Louis the Younger, Louis the Lion, Saint Louis, Louis the Quarrelsome, Louis the Prudent, Louis of Orleans, Louis the Just, Louis the Great, Louis the Beloved, Louis the 16th. Louis the 16th was Marie Antoinette's husband, so that didn't end well. For that drama, check out her episode. 12-year-old Blanca was sent from Spain to France to marry the heir to their throne, 13-year-old Louis the Lion. He was the 8th Louis, if you lost count. They were married legally and in the eyes of God. They waited to start a family, thankfully. They were both very young. Blanca, Infanta of Castile, became Blanche, Dauphine of France. 5 years later, Blanche was 17 and pregnant. 17-year-old Blanche gave birth to a baby girl that she named Blanche after herself, but baby Blanche died shortly after her birth. 2 years later, Blanche was 19 and pregnant again. 19-year-old Blanche gave birth to another baby girl that they named Agnes, but baby Agnes also died shortly after birth. So her teenage years were rough. She was married at 12, then was pregnant twice and lost both of her baby girls. In 1209, Blanche was 21 and pregnant for the 3rd time. I'm assuming she was very nervous about the birth of this baby. 21-year-old Blanche gave birth to a little boy, Prince Philip, named after his grandfather, the reigning King Philip II of France. I can't imagine the relief Blanche must have had after this pregnancy, and after the surviving baby boy, the heir apparent of France. But they needed a spare, and the royal couple's track record wasn't encouraging. Their only job right now was to produce heirs. In January 1213, Blanche was expecting again. This time, she seemed to be carrying heavier. On the 26th of January 1213, 24-year-old Blanche gave birth to twin boys, Alfonso and John. Unfortunately, both boys died 3 days after they were born. It wasn't easy to have healthy twins in the 13th century. Blanche had been pregnant 4 times, having 5 babies, and only one had survived, 3-year-old Prince Philip. Just over a year later, she was expecting again, and I'm sure nervous. She had lost 4 of her 5 babies. On the 25th of April, 1214, Blanche gave birth to her 6th child, and second one to survive their birth. Prince Louis was born and survived. Blanche had given France a spare. This Louis was Saint Louis of the aforementioned Louis. But things started to go downhill for Blanche's English family. Her grandmother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, had died at the age of 53. Matriarch Eleanor of Aquitaine had really been the only one holding things together in England. Blanche's uncle, John, was kind of falling apart. His people had put him on timeout with the Magna Carta. Blanche needed to cling to her French and Spanish relatives instead of her English ones. Blanche and her husband Louis the Lion betrothed their spare to an heiress because why not? As the oldest girl with no surviving brothers, she was expected to inherit her parents' lands and titles. The next year, Blanche was expecting again. On the 25th of September, 1216, 28-year-old Dauphine Blanche had her next baby. Prince Robert was added to the royal nursery, joining his brothers 2-year-old Louis, 7-year-old Philip. Probably 7-year-old Philip because he died around this time. He was followed a year and a half later by another brother, Prince Philip, named after his older brother Prince Philip, who would have been 8, but had died sometime before this, meaning that their spare, Louis, was the new heir to the throne. The royal nursery consisted of 3-year-old Louis, 1-year-old Robert, and baby Philip, the Queen's 6th, 7th, and 8th children, because the 5 oldest had died, 4 of them shortly after birth, and Philip in his childhood. Blanche of Castile had suffered a lot of loss in her short 30 years. At 31, Dauphine Blanche gave birth to her next child. On the 21st of July, 1219, Blanche had another baby. Prince John was born. And the following year, 32-year-old Blanche gave birth to Prince Alphonse, named after her father, King Alfonso of Castile. That same year, 2-year-old Prince Philip died. And so, of course, the 20th of February, 1222, 33-year-old Dauphine Blanche named her next baby Prince Philip. Maybe this Philip would survive. At this time, Blanche's children were 8-year-old Louis, 6-year-old Robert, 3-year-old John, 2-year-old Alphonse, and baby Philip. They had 5 surviving babies out of 11. When the third baby Philip was almost a year and a half old, his grandfather, King Philip II of France, died at the age of 57, leaving his throne to his son, Blanche's husband, Louis the Lion. The king is dead, long live the king, King Louis VIII. Dauphine Blanche, formerly Infanta Blanca, became Queen Blanche of France, and she was also newly pregnant with her next child, the first one to be born while she was the queen. In March 1224, Blanche gave birth to Princess Isabella, her first daughter to survive. And the following year, another daughter, Princess Etienne. And the following year, she added Prince Charles. The royal nursery was now comprised of 12-year-old Dauphin Louis, 10-year-old Prince Robert, 7-year-old Prince John, 6-year-old Prince Alphonse, 4-year-old Prince Philip, 2-year-old Princess Isabella, 1-year-old Princess Etienne, and baby Prince Charles. Sometime, likely just before baby Charles was born, bad news. Blanche's husband, King Louis the Lion, died at the age of 39 after being king for only 3 years. Dysentery, a side effect from hanging out with his army too much. Queen Blanche was now the queen mother, and the king was her 12-year-old son, Louis. The king is dead. Long live the king. King Louis IX, known as Saint Louis. This death triggered the moment you may remember from Matilda, Countess of Bologna's episode. Blanche's brother-in-law, the half-brother of her late husband, shot his shot. He offered himself up as tribute to be king in case anyone was opposed to a 12-year-old king. That king's uncle was an adult, but Blanche shut that down real quick. Her husband had named Blanche regent for her young son. She offered her brother-in-law money, lands, and titles to take his ball and go home, and he accepted this payoff. Blanche had been named by her husband as regent for just a couple of years until Louis IX was old enough to reign, and that took up a lot of her time. The first year of little King Louis's reign, Blanche's youngest daughter died at about 1.5 years old. Blanche couldn't afford to slow down and mourn the death of yet another child. She was running the country for 13-year-old King Louis IX. Because there are a lot of changes in Blanche's living children, here's the rundown one more time. 13-year-old King Louis XI, 11-year-old Prince Robert, 8-year-old Prince John, 7-year-old Prince Alphonse, 5-year-old Prince Philip, 3-year-old Princess Isabella, and baby Charles. 3 years later, the King of England, who had a bit of a rivalry with the Queen Regent of France, invaded France. He was fed up with his cousin, Queen Regent Blanche, and her teenage king's son. He was still mad from when she had encouraged her late husband to attack England. It didn't go well. Both armies revolted against their leaders. King Louis ended up winning mostly due to his mother Blanche, and he relied on her for advice for the rest of his life. In 1232, Blanche's son John died at around the age of 13. In 1334, two things happened. Blanche's son Philip died at the age of just 12, and her son King Louis married at the age of 20. He married 13-year-old Margaret of Provence, the heiress from before, but we'll get back to that story later. In 1237, Blanche married off two more of her sons. 21-year-old Robert married 13-year-old Matilda of Brabant, and 17-year-old Alphonse married 17-year-old Joan, Countess of Toulouse. This is when Blanche entered her grandmother era. Her children were now 32-year-old King Louis, father of three, Isabella, Louis, and Philip, 30-year-old Prince Robert, Count of Artois, 26-year-old Alphonse, Count of Poitiers, 22-year-old Princess Isabella, and 20-year-old Prince Charles, Count of Anjou. Of Blanche's 14 children, 5 of them were healthy, thriving adults. 22-year-old Isabel had dedicated her virginity to God. She wasn't a nun, but she planned to live as one. She had plenty of brothers to further the Capetian family line. And, as a female member of the royal family, her children weren't eligible to inherit the throne anyway. 20-year-old Prince Charles was now getting married. He married the youngest sister of his sister-in-law Margaret, 17-year-old Beatrice of Provence, another heiress as sister of the previous heiress. In 1228, Blanche's son, King Louis IX, went off on crusade. He made his most trusted advisor his regent, his mother, 60-year-old Queen Blanche of France. She was again regent for her son. She was by this point suffering from some heart issues. That same year, her son Robert had his first daughter, named after Blanche. She would one day become Queen of Navarre. Not to be outdone, Blanche's youngest son Charles also had a baby, named after his mother, Blanche. 2 years later, Blanche lost her 33-year-old son Robert. Over the next couple of years, more grandchildren were added to her brood, but we have plenty of time to get into that later. In 1252, Blanche died at the age of 64. Queen Blanche was survived by her 37-year-old son, King Louis IX, the saintly one, who wasn't told about her death for 6 months. When they finally told him, he refused to talk to anyone for days. He was the father of 12-year-old Princess Isabella, 10-year-old Dauphin Louis, 6-year-old Prince Philip, 1-year-old Prince John Tristan, and baby Prince Peter. After his mother's death, he named his next daughter Blanche. She was also survived by 32-year-old Prince Alphonse, Count of Poitiers, 28-year-old and still a virgin Princess Isabel, 25-year-old Prince Charles and his children Blanche and Beatrice, and the children of her late son Robert, 5-year-old Blanche and 3-year-old Robert. And that is where I'll leave it for now. What did you think of Blanche of Castile, aka Infanta Blanca of Castile? Her life sounded really hard to me. I know this episode may seem more about her children than her, but she did have 14 children, and it seems like she dedicated her entire life to them, and I can respect that. Her kids were her passion. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast. If you enjoyed this episode, leave me 5 stars. I love stars. The more the merrier. And join us over on Patreon for more fun. I'd like to shout out my patron, Tracy. Girl, you were my first patron, and I appreciate that more than you know. Long live to all the queens out there. And until next time, bye.
You'll be remembered.
Thanks for listening.